Hey everybody, it's Beej with Lambda School. In this video, we're going to extend our Django application. We're going to add a data model to help us model some data. That is our objective for this video. We're going to talk about what a model is and how it's related to the database that Django keeps under the hood, and tie it into what we saw before with migrations. So how do we make migrations for this new thing? So what are we going to actually define here? What we're going to do is get back into our virtual environment here. We'll bring up Visual Studio Code here, and we'll look at our Notes app. This is where we're going to add our model. And what are we modeling here? We're modeling a note, and so we have to decide what fields that note has. And it's a note, so we might want a title for the note and some content in the note. And we are going to define that in our models.py file. It says create our models here. We see we're importing models from Django. So let's go ahead and do this. So I'm going to make a model for our note, and that's going to be a class note, and it's going to inherit from models.model. So we get all the built-in models functionality from Django. And we want to add a couple fields here. So we'll add a couple class attributes here. Models.char field. We'll give it a maximum length. And then we're also going to add our content. And we'll make that one a text field. Django has a bunch of different kinds of built-in fields for all kinds of stuff. We'll see in a minute we'll use a UID field for storing a UID, but here we've got character fields, which you can think of as a simple text input field. Text field, which you can think of as a text box, a multi-line input field. There are date input fields, URL input fields. There are all kinds of things. And by choosing the proper field type from Django's list of built-in fields, you get a bunch of functionality for free, especially when you build Django front ends. This field we're going to allow to be blank. So we'll set that blank equals true. And that is the basics for our note. But we also want to add one more thing. We want to add something that uniquely identifies this note. And so we're going to give it an ID field. And that ID field will have a universally unique identifier, or a UID, in it. And a UID is basically a big random string, but we'll have this all generated for us automatically. But what's important is that since it is going to be a UID, it's going to be a UID field that makes up this thing. And we're going to add more here in a second. The UID we can generate from a built-in Python library. We're going to use the UID4 function. UID4 is a random UID. And for parameters here, we're going to say that this is a primary key, which is a special indicator to Django that this is represented as a primary identifier within the database for each record. And it will be unique and searchable upon this. And we give it a default value. And for the default value, you can pass in a function. And the function will be called, and whatever value it returns will be the value for this record that we create. And so if we just have it called UID4, it'll generate a random UID for us whenever a record gets created, when a new note gets created. So that's useful to have. And then also, we have no reason to allow a user to edit this field. Editing title and content, sure, but ID, this is going to be automatically generated. So we're going to set editable to false. So there we've got these three fields in here. And we've defined the note model for a note app, which is all good. One thing we haven't done yet, though, is we haven't told Django to actually enable this Notes app. We used Start app to make the app, but we have to go into our settings and we have to tell it that Notes is one of the installed apps. So inside the settings, you find the installed apps line, and we're just going to add Notes to this. And this basically enables it. Tells Django, hey, we want to run this app. We want this app to be enabled. So now that we have all this in place, let's have a look at our migrations. Well, this is kind of interesting. We've defined a new model, but we know that model's not in the database yet because we haven't run any migrations on it. Remember, migrations are what cause a model to get represented within the SQL database. And we see here now that we've shown migrations, and we actually do have notes here. And Django knows about notes now because we added it to the installed apps in the settings. So there is that, but it doesn't think there are any migrations yet for it. It doesn't have anything to migrate. And so when we make changes to our model, or when we introduce models, the first thing we have to do is make migrations. And this will look at models that we have, and it'll look and see if any of the models are newer than what's in the database. And if they are, a migration will be generated. Now, normally, you don't have to look at these migrations, but you see it made it here in notes migration 001 initial.py. We could actually go have a look. Notes, migrations, here it is. This is the file that was automatically generated. There's a nice helpful header here telling us, hey, this was automatically generated for you. And if we look in here, we don't know what all this stuff does, but hey, here's create model, and here's our fields, ID, title, and content, and kind of some of our code is here. So it's looked at our model, and it's put together this Python code to run the migration. And then we also had that other trick that we had to look at the SQL command that would be run for this. Let's show migrations one more time. Now we see that we've made migrations. We see our migration is now here. It's now listed under notes. There's no X in there, which means that the migrate hasn't happened yet. But let's have a look and see what will happen with the SQL migrate command for notes 0001 initial. Let's see what the SQL looks like. Just a little peek under the hood here, optionally. Looks like we have a transaction here, create table notes. The table is called notes underscore note. And here's a bunch of SQL types that correspond to our ID, our title, and our content. Again, you don't really need to know that, but it's neat to see what's going on under the hood. So the steps were make the model in the models.py file, run manage.py make migrations to make the migration, and now we have to migrate. So let's do a migrate, and at this point it's going to say it's applying our migration. And now at this point the database is prepared. The database knows about notes. It's run that SQL command that we peeked at right up there. So the table's been created for the notes, and if we show migrations at this point, we see an X next to our notes migration. It's been migrated. Everything is good to go. So with that, we have added a new model to hold our note information. If we update this later with additional fields, then our class will be out of sync with the database. And when that happens, when you add additional fields or take away fields or change the model in any way, then you should make migrations to get a new migration and run that migration to run migrate to get that migration into the database. Migrations should also be checked into source control for the record. So that's it for this video. For a challenge, add another data model that describes some type of data that you're interested in. We're doing notes here, but I'd encourage you to make a different app other than the notes app. Use start app to make a different app and put a different type of data in there. And as always, thanks for watching the video.